You don't need to expect us. We're already here.
Most guys freeze. That's your cerebral cortex looking for an answer it doesn't have.
See? Even your brain knows you're screwed.
The body's filling with adrenaline right now, whether you know it or not. Your heart's beating fast. It's getting a little harder to breathe. The neurobiological system is telling it to run, but your knees are too weak to move.
Fear is not real. The only place that fear can exist is in our thoughts of the future. It is a product of our imagination, causing us to fear things that do not at present and may not ever exist. That is near insanity. Do not misunderstand me. Danger is very real, but fear is a choice. We are all telling ourselves a story.
You're listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. 100% listener-supported radio. Reporting to danger. Unafraid. Right here, where information never sleeps. Revolution Radio.
Enter into a world unseen on Raven Star's Witching Hour. You will encounter eclectic topics from the realm of spirit brought into our matrix of truth. With your host, the Solaris Blue Raven. Solaris will bring you an array of unique guests covering topics from ghostly spirits to amazing anomalies, covert technology, UFOs, and shadowy global events.
And that's right here, Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, Saturdays, midnight till 2 a.m. Eastern Time. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
Let the magic rise.
Did you ever feel that things were not quite right? That everything was just ever so slightly askew?
Do you have, to paraphrase Morpheus, a splinter in your mind?
If you're interested in hearing the latest information about UFOs, the paranormal,
ancient cultures and structures,
monatomic elements,
longevity,
fantastic discoveries in science,
downloaded to your brain,
then tune into us. Hi, I'm Dave.
And I'm Mackie.
And we are Shiny Side Out, Sundays 2 to 4 a.m. Eastern. See you then.
Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here. The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Hi, this is Christine Joan Hart's Christine Joan Hart Show, and I'm broadcasting live from London, and I have an interesting show for you tonight. It's the end of the summer, everyone's feeling a bit low, so I thought I'd cheer you all up and bring on a really exciting guest who's an Egyptologist and author of amazing books, Awakening Osiris, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the Union of Isis and Thoth, Magic and Initiatory Practices of Ancient Egypt. So she's also, is a lecturer and a teacher, I'm going to bring her on right now. She's called Normandi Ellis. And so let me see if I can bring her on. She's not showing... she's not showing... She's not showing green for her status. So... let's hope that that goes green in a minute. Okay, so it's orange. I hope she wasn't offended by me saying to hang loose. Okay, I'm not sure I'll be able to pick her up. She's oh, there, great. Okay. Sorry about this, everyone. It's the end of the term holiday. My son went back to school for the first time. Oops, it's gone red again. Oh, I hope I'm not going to have trouble bringing her on. I really do. So yeah, I rushed home. First day back at school, so it wasn't really a great day for me. I didn't sleep at all last night, and I feel like hell frozen over. I really do. Let's see if I can bring this lady on. Hello, Normandi, are you with us? I can slightly hear something. Normandi? Normandi? Oh dear, we're gonna have trouble. We're gonna have trouble with wonderful Skype. You just love it. I'm sure. Okay, we're having a little bit of trouble. Sorry about this. I might have to drop the studio. Gosh, this is why probably it's best to get people waiting before you come on. Okay. Sorry about this, everyone. I'm trying to get her to put her status on green. Okay, it's beside your picture. Little picture. Okay. I don't know. I might have to. Yeah. Oh, no. It's gone. Oh, no. It's gone red again. Sorry about this, everyone. Oh, gosh, wow. So stressful. That's why you really, mostly do need a producer. I'm going to drop the studio and see if I can pick up this lady again. Oh. Okay, I've got the studio again. I am now going to see if I can bring her in again. She's now there. Add to call. Come on, work for me. Hello.
Hey, how are you?
Finally. Finally, I got you on air. Oh, I can see you there. Hiya, how are you?
Oh, good. Good to see you.
Yes. I don't do videoing because it might ruin with the audio, but you can do it. It's fine. It's better for me. Then I I can see you and relate to you more. So excellent. So finally got you on air. The studio is because your little thing was going red, and then the studio can't pick you up. So but we've got you now. So fantastic.
Okay, good. All right.
Thank goodness. So I introduced you already to the audience, so they're quite excited. My audience is quite advanced in all things spiritual and magic, so that will be good. We'll be able to have an in-depth chat tonight, and thank you for joining me.
Well, my pleasure.
Excellent. So where are you right now? Whereabouts in America?
I'm in Chesterfield, Indiana,
Oh, right.
which it's about 45 minutes from Indianapolis.
Oh, brilliant. Beautiful, beautiful area.
It is. I live on the grounds of a 135-year-old spiritualist camp, so it's quite lovely here.
Oh, excellent. And what was it that brought you to Egypt, Normandy? Your name is fascinating. Is that French?
Well, I think so, but my father named me that, so it doesn't really have any French heritage that goes with it. He was in the war, but he was in Sydney, Australia at the time. I think he just liked the name.
Oh, it's lovely, isn't it?
Thank you. Yes.
Really
yes.
Nice. So what started your spiritual journey, Normandy?
Well, it took a kind of a strange turn. I had actually started studying Dion Fortune's work when I was a young woman, and got quite fascinated with mysticism, and ran into a friend of mine who had grown up the street from me. He was a few years older than I was, and his name was Robert Weiler, and he was drafted. His number was fairly high back then, and he was drafted into the army to go to Vietnam, and which he went. But before he went, his father, who was a doctor, said that he wanted him to study as a medic. And then the Rosicrucians came to him and said, "You're going to be assisting souls in transition, and we want to teach you how to do that." And as part of that training that he went through before he became a medic in Vietnam, he studied the various books of the dead. And we were having a conversation about that one day, and he said to me, "Well, you should study the Egyptian Book of the Dead." And I said, "Oh, sounds really interesting." He said, "No, you really need to study it." He walked me across the street to the bookstore. He picked the book up off the shelf. He put it in my hand and said, "Buy this." And I said, "Okay." So I bought the book. That night, he comes to my house with all of his Rosicrucian teachings, and he says to me, "I have to go out of town, and I'm going to give you these books to caretake while I'm gone. You know, we're not supposed to show them around, but you can read them if you would like." I said, "Okay." So he left. I had his books, and he didn't come back for several months. I moved to Colorado. I didn't hear from him. I thought if he wanted his books back, he would get in touch with my mother, who lived up the street from his parents. Didn't hear from him. I went back to Kentucky a year later and opened the newspaper and found his obituary. Actually, it was a news article about his murder. He had been murdered. And that kind of took a big hit in my heart. You know, it was like, so this man gives me all of his Rosicrucian teachings and tells me I have to read the Book of the Dead, and then he passes into spirit. What am I supposed to do about this? So I was at that time getting my master's degree in creative writing and English literature at the University of Colorado, and was translating from Spanish, but we had to have a second language. And as it turned out, the second language that fascinated me was hieroglyphs. So I took the Book of the Dead. I got a lot of various other translations. I got a good grammar dictionary. I got all of Robert's Rosicrucian teachings. And lo and behold, 10 years later, I had translated the Egyptian Book of the Dead from front to back 3 times.
Wow.
And it was just, it was a work that was put into my hands, and I have to say, when Spirit puts something in your hands, you just don't say no. Oh. So that's how it happened. That's how I got interested in the Book of the Dead. And it was only after, I almost threw it away, which is really interesting. But I was driving up to the dumpster after a fight with my then husband about my obsessiveness over this text. And as I'm driving up to the dumpster, the Robert's spirit appeared in the back of the car and touched me. And at that point, I realized I couldn't throw it away. So I just hid it in the wheel well of the car where the spare tire was. And then I published it, a couple of months later. And so that's how that happened.
Well, it's amazing because I had been told that the Egyptian Book of the Dead was a bad book, and it was all the Egyptians were into mind control, and you'd find it in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. So I was put off, reading it, and it was only recently that a friend of mine interviewed a woman who had gone to the British Museum and had an experience with Sekhmet, the statue, and she had touched it and felt it come inside her. Is that quite, does that happen quite a lot too?
Well, yes, Sekhmet is, she is very, very powerful. And many women have a connection to her right away. Well, many men as well. She is simply one of the most powerful goddesses in the whole pantheon. And I believe that's so because she's a goddess of magic. She's a goddess of willpower. But when you talk about how ancient Egyptians were into mind control, I think that's interesting because anyone who doesn't want you to make something of your life will tell you that so-and-so is into mind control. And the truth of the matter is, as we all know, as metaphysicians, that your whole life is being able to control your own mind and to understand how to think your own thoughts, how to project your thoughts into the world to create the reality that you would like to live in. And the ancient Egyptians, they had this idea of something called Heka, which was another word for magic, or it was, it was a prescription that the proper words, the proper sequence, the proper intonation, and the proper intent, and you could create on par with divine beings as a co-creator. Now, I think that's nothing more than the law of mind, which is that we learn thoughts or things and how we think them and what we tell ourselves and the emotion, the power and the resonance that we put behind what we think, and the veracity that we give our language. If you doubt something, then doubt becomes the operative emotional impulse that then erases what you've just written. So it's learning how to, control your mind and control your thoughts and to create your own reality.
Oh, I see. Is that have you done that aspect of it in one of your books?
Yes, actually, we talk about that in. I talk about that in Imagining the World into Existence. I go into that idea of co-creation of reality quite a bit, and I talk about the different ways that the Egyptian gods and goddesses created their realities. Some spoke the world into being. Some of them, like Khnum, was one of the gods who got his hands dirty in the mud, like Yahweh, he makes people out of clay, and, with his breath and blows on it. And so there's all these different creation stories that talk to us about different ways to create. Mathematics is another way. Thoth creates with mathematics. And then in a book that I co-authored with Nikki Scully called The Union of Isis and Thoth.
Oh, I've got that.
We talk about that in detail, and also how to create your own temple, and to really work the energy of the gods and the goddesses.
Yeah, I mean, I just had the experience when I heard about this lady. I'd actually, a friend of mine had mentioned the god Hathor, and I was thinking about my own name bizarrely, and I was thinking about how my own name, because I was adopted, doesn't really fit with me. And I was thinking what I'd like to be called, and this Hath thing got into my head, and I kept thinking of a name Hat, and I thought Harriet, and then a friend of mine was talking to me. He said something about Egypt, and he said Hathor, and the whole name just really resonated with me. And I looked it up, and it was just at the same time this other lady had had this experience, and so then I went along to the British Museum, and just really felt, seeing the pillars that were there taken, from Egypt, and really felt strongly that I'd been there back then. Is that an experience that a lot of people? I know there was a guy in the introduction of your book. He was a little bit disparaging about how everyone thinks they used to live in ancient Egypt, but I suppose some people must have done.
Well, I think Hathor is one of the oldest names of any of the divine feminine beings in ancient Egypt. Hathor is a perfectly lovely name for you. It fits your face, I must say.
Oh, really? Thank you.
But I think, a culture that has a recorded history of about 3,000 years, and a history that goes further back and further back than that, I really feel that there are many, many pieces of lifetimes that, we have all lived there. We're all created from stardust. And when we pass into spirit, our atoms are sloughed off, and they become and return part of the atomic structure of the universe. Those sands in ancient Egypt are just so filled with memory and energy. Every single crystalline structure retains a memory to it. The cell phones that we have, our satellites, crystals are how the communication is kept in the Akashic record. And I truly believe that Egypt holds the Akashic records because it has such strong crystalline structure in the sands, around the Sphinx and around the pyramids and so on. I do believe that many people have had past lives in ancient Egypt. I know that my DNA tells me that I have ancient Egyptian blood, from North Africa. But I also feel that sometimes not all of us will remember a lifetime from that particular area. We only remember what we need to know for our souls work this particular lifetime, to work out this karma, And I'm sure I've probably had other incarnations in other places besides Egypt, but the ones that come through most strongly for me right now are the ones that are from Egypt.
Yes.
So, yes. Yeah. And the other thing I think, too, that's important to remember is that we think of time as a linear construct, but, when we think about our soul's life, it's just a blip on a line that could be forward or backward, because, time is nothing to the spiritual world. We can incarnate in the past as easily as incarnate in the future. It doesn't necessarily have to be linear.
Oh, can we incarnate in the past? I didn't know that.
Yes, we can.
Oh, right. Interesting. Yeah. Oh, there are always you just mentioned time, and I spoke to somebody about time who was, they were trying to have a link with ancient Egypt. The Michael Aquino guy who set that Temple of Set. Why does someone like that sort of latch on to Set, for example?
Well, I think that there are all kinds of, we think of energies as, we try to think of them as positive or negative. But the truth of the matter, energy is simply energy. And there's like a sliding scale of, up or down, or intensity or lack of intensity. I don't necessarily think that Set is a negative energy. For example, Set became what we know as the star Saturn to the Greeks. Saturn you can think of as like, it's a difficult planet when you have it in your chart. No, it's a planet of form. It's a planet of matter. It's a planet of, as the teacher of how to put things into form. Saturn becomes that particular teacher. And Set, in a way, his story is very much linked to those people in ancient Egypt who were hunters and gatherers. And the Osirians, Osiris, his tribe was agricultural. And those two tribes are going to be in opposition. How do we survive in the world? Do we fight? Do we eat animals, or do we raise plants and stay in one spot? So you have this whole pole of energy that goes, from nurturing to exploratory and really moving around, which is what Set did. And I don't think that one is necessarily a negative. I think that everything has to do with how we use that energy, if we're using it in a positive or a negative way. Chaos, people associate Set with chaos, but Set is change, and a lot of times change does seem like chaos at first.
Yeah, and so he's not the Christian Satan.
Well, I think he's been cast in that role. And I think that, the energy that Christians have given to Set as the Satan is a kind of a dangerous thing, because what they don't realize is that capacity rests as well within themselves, So we just, how do you use the idea of something that we have to fight against? A lot of times we have to fight against things within ourselves. There are things that seem perfectly wonderful and lovely, and turn into sloth, because it's just like, oh yeah, I don't have to fight against that. Do you know what I mean?
Uh-huh. What happened with the because the gods seem to what I found from reading your book anyway, I found your translation of the Egyptian Book of Dead was that I had always searched, I was brought up a Catholic, and I'd always searched for this connection to God, and reading the Bible didn't really do it for me. And people say, read the Bible, and I have got so many translations of the damn Bible. I've got the Message, I've got Unlocking the Bible, I've got it in every different version, and I read it, and it just leaves me like flat and cold. And I read your translation, I actually read it out loud a bit on the show, and it really made me feel in touch with God. I really felt it, and it just made me think, well, why has that been stamped out? Why isn't everybody reading this? Why wasn't I given it when I was a child, for example?
Well, thank you. I mean, I'm glad you've enjoyed that translation. Oh. I really feel that, well, for one thing, it always fascinates me when I think about the Vatican being the owner of all of the most important pieces of Egyptian obelisks. They're all around the Vatican Circle. They have more obelisks in the Vatican Circle than they have in Egypt anymore.
Oh, sorry, can I just ask you, what's an obelisk?
Oh, an obelisk is that very tall stone that has a pointed peak,
Okay.
and it's usually got the hieroglyphs written on it. And there's some, there are some around in Europe and in London and in the United States, but the Vatican has the most of them, And if they didn't believe that there was some kind of power inside that energy, why would they have taken them and put them around the Vatican? There's a lot of stuff that resides in the back of the Vatican that that people have not been allowed to look into. And what amazes me about this whole idea of Christianity as being the purveyor of like the decent religion, if you will, is that it's only the interpretation that the church gives to other people. Once we start looking at the basic unity of religion, we see that the most important concepts, whether they're Christian or Jewish or Islamic or Buddhist or Hindu, all of those basic teachings, there's an underlying principle in all of them. And every single one of those texts, to me, goes back to the ancient Egyptians and to things that I have read in that text. Now, any literal reading of a Book of the Dead misses the mark, I think, because that language works not only as you can't do what I'm trying to say is you can't do a word for word translation with that. You have to work with how the symbol is being used. You have to work with how the sounds are being used, because the law of vibration and the sacred vowel structure of the Egyptian language, the way it's a pun, the way it's a conundrum, all of that works. All of the myths are embedded inside the hieroglyphs themselves. And so it takes more than one reading to understand what those hieroglyphs are talking about, which is why it took me 10 years to try to translate them, because I would do it and I would think, that's not it yet. That's not it yet. But once you go down to the nut meat of the language and the meaning of the Egyptian hieroglyphs and the spiritual texts, you find that it's in every single religion, the law of Ma'at.
After reading your book, should I go on now and read another different translation as well? I mean, how do I go deeper now?
I would say go ahead and read just about anything you can put your hands on and use your own feeling, your own gut instinct as to, does this ring true or not? I think that there are some very beautiful translations, say Miriam Lichtem's translations of the hieroglyphs. I think they're very good. They're much better than Budge's, for example. I think there's a man named John Foster, who's a poet, who really dove into some of the hieroglyphs. But if you look at, say, which is not in the Book of the Dead, but if you look at a translation of the hymn to the great Aten by the Pharaoh Akhenaten, if you open the Bible to Psalm 104, you can read those side by side and say, oh my God, this is the same text, So that sort of change.
The hymn to who?
The great hymn to Aten, Aten, the sun god. Yeah. And you can find that in John Foster's translation of that, or Miriam Lichtem. And then if you go to the Lammas Bible by George Lammas, he translates it from the Aramaic, and it's quite different than what you see in the King James Version. And so you'll see that those two texts go side by side, almost line for line.
It's interesting because after I started reading, and then I thought about Moses, because I started wondering then where Christianity came into everything. And then I thought about Moses, and actually they say that Moses was supposedly around in the time of Ramesses, but Ramesses hasn't recorded anything about the Israelites and slavery. Is that right?
Well, Moses is an Egyptian name. When you look at the hieroglyph, there are a lot of Egyptian gods like Thutmoses and Ramoses and Tammoses, and Moses simply means child.
Oh.
Okay. It's usually a child who's dedicated to some god or goddess, you know. So if he was in the lineage of Ramses, he could have simply dropped that part of his name and simply called himself Moses. Now, the story goes that the Pharaoh's daughter names him Moses. And they ask her in the Bible, it says, why did you name him Moses? And she said, because I drew him from the water, which makes absolutely no sense unless you realize that ancient Egyptians are fond of puns. And so there's a similar word between Moses and Moshes, which means crocodile. So she's kind of saying he was a little crocodile child, and I pulled him from the water. It was almost like a little joke. But there were a ton of Ramses. There was not just Ramses the Great. There were many, many, many Ramses that followed after. And the truth of the matter is that we don't really know if Ramses the Great was the Pharaoh that is being talked about in that particular biblical story.
And it was odd because it seems to have gone from worshipping all the gods and worshipping the sun god and the god of creation. And then, of course, Akhenaten came along and he just wanted one god worshipped. And then I think Moses was on the tail of that. But, I mean, it's just so odd that they managed to stamp out a whole way of being, a whole way. I mean, now it's portrayed as something like, oh, the silly Egyptians who worship the sun, weren't they slightly retarded? But it's like a way of worshipping the creator and a way of getting close to God, to see everything as an expression of God, as a God in itself. And it's quite... It seems to me that it was stamped out with quite a lot of force.
Right. And one of the things I think is that when we talk about a god or a goddess, the ancient Egyptians had a word for that, which was NTR. It didn't really put a vowel in it. So the Egyptologists called it Neteru. But the Coptic Christians, who have the last remnant of the old ancient Egyptian language, when you go into a Coptic monastery and you hear them praying to God, they say Neter, N-E-T, like C-H-J-E-R, something like that. That same word back in early Christianity and Alexandrian times, and when Plato was doing all of his philosophical readings, a lot of which he got from the Egyptians, he called it nature. So nature and nature are the same. It's the natural world. It's the divine essence that is the God consciousness inside every single thing. It's the law of seed. We all come from and all return to the divine. And so that idea of Neter or nature becomes, it's like, oh, I live in a city that's out in the middle of the desert. And so, my idea of what the strongest God is when the sun comes up and the sun goes down. And so I'm going to be relating that to Ra, the sun god, or maybe it's Re. It's pronounced different ways, but that becomes the divine being. The great mother is the vulture that's circling in the sky. She was the great mother because of the qualities that they looked at in her. That is, she could create life within an egg from her being. She also took what had passed away, what was dead, and consumed it in order to sustain life. And when there was a drought and her babies were starving, she plucked from her own breast and fed her children. That's what vultures did. So it's that idea of the divine feminine that, from which we are born and to which we return, and which is all nourishing. That's the idea of, a vulture as the great mother. It's not necessarily the vulture itself, but it's the symbol of that, right?
Yeah. So some people say that the ancient Egyptians or the gods were the Anunnaki come to Earth, or the Nephilim, one or the other. I mean, what are your thoughts on that, Normandi?
Well, I think that's something I want to look into a little more before I actually give a pronouncement on that, because I know that there are a lot of connections between the Sumerian gods and goddesses and beliefs of the places from which we came and the ancient Egyptian. I think that it's fascinating to me that the Dogons of Africa, well before there were any satellites, had the idea that there was a double sun. They knew that Sirius was, not just one star, but two stars. And they had drawings of how these beings, these gods and goddesses, arrived in their ships from Sirius. And then, of course, there were stories about the Pleiadians, who come from the Pleiades, and the seven Hathors, which Tom Kenyon is very much connected with the seven Hathors. And then there are stories about Sanat Kumara and the divine beings that came with him to planet Earth back during the time when the Lemurians and the Atlanteans were ruling planet Earth. And so there's, Earth has a much, much longer history, and we have a shorter memory.
So who was that you mentioned, the last chat with the planet Lemuria and Atlantis? Who was?
Oh, Sanat Kumara.
I've never heard of that. Is that a man?
It's a being. He's not from around here. He comes from the planet Venus, but he is part of a much larger hierarchy than which is kind of overseeing planet Earth and overshadowing planet Earth. And there are
saw something called.
Yeah, and it's you can find a lot of information about this in the writings of Alice Bailey.
The Theosophist.
Yes. And so Sanat Kumara and the Anunnaki and the people from the Dogon tribes, all of those, I'm trying to still wrap my mind around that at this stage.
Yeah.
And there are, in the ancient Egyptian tradition, there are a group of people called the Shamsu, or Shamsu Hor, and they're the followers of Horus, and they predate the first kings of Egypt, and they are supposed to have ruled for 10,000 years.
Really?
So there's stories about them, and I don't know how true they are, but it's quite interesting to think about.
So where are they? Has somebody written a book?
Well, you find the Egyptians actually refer to them, and you find them. They were supposed to have lived during a part of their life in what's now the Sahara, and it was like a large savanna at that time. Oh. And even when you look at maps of Europe and North Africa, back during like 40,000 BC, there was a land bridge between the boot of Italy and Libya, and that is what people think was how those red-haired, blue-eyed people that became part of Seth's culture, they were pretty much like Celtic hunters and gatherers who were following game across this land bridge into Africa. And then when that land bridge sank and the waters dried up, and the savanna turned into a Sahara, these particular people moved over into the delta area of ancient Egypt and met with the African people who were coming down the Nile, and thus created the first, battle between the Scythians and the Osirians. But that was like 40,000 years ago. And I'm going soon in February to visit the Valley of the Whales, which is in the desert, the Sahara Desert, and there are sand hills that have revealed themselves to be the bones of whales that were trapped there. So apparently there was a point in time where these water-going mammals who were at that time developing feet got trapped in the Sahara Desert when the water dried up. And so their skeletons are still there, and you can go and see them. It's quite interesting.
Oh, lovely. So what is your idea about the creation? Do you go along with what the ancient Egyptians thought?
Well, they have several creation myths, and so I think creation stories talk about ways of making. I don't think that there's one creation story, but I will tell you that when you go to Aswan, the island of Elephantine, there's a temple to the god Khnum, who makes people out of clay. And right next door to it, there is a temple to Yahweh, which also has a feminine consort in it, the way Khnum does. But that temple is dedicated to the god who makes people out of clay. So there's a Jewish and an ancient Egyptian civilization living side by side at the same time during the time of Queen Hatshepsut, which is very interesting.
Yeah, it is. Where do you think the god Yahweh came from? Is that Aten? Is that the same as Aten? Or is that a separate god in your opinion, Yahweh?
Oh, I really wouldn't be a scholar to define that.
What's your instinct tell you?
My instinct tells me that there are similarities in the ancient Egyptian and in the Hebrew, but there was a separate language, and that they shared ideas. They also shared similarities in their alphabets, and that the flame alphabet, the sacred vowels of the Hebrew language were very similar to the sacred vowels in the ancient Egyptian language. So, because the vowel was always the breath of God, I think there are many similarities. I'm not going to say that they were exactly the same, but I will say they were certainly developing and taking information from each other side by side. I don't know which came first, chicken or the egg.
In the Exodus, you have Yahweh killing the firstborn of the Pharaoh, and he's quite nasty, really, isn't he? He's quite, he's not nurturing or anything. So which god in the Egyptians would he correspond with?
I really don't know. I mean, that's a question I think that someone who's probably more of a well-storied and studied scholar of the Middle Eastern religions would tell you. And I don't know. I really don't know. I do know that when they say that we're sending a plague, the river's going to turn red. Well, what that has to do with the fact that the river always turned red that time of year, because that's when it flooded. It would flood, and it would take all of this effluvia and the algae that had turned red way up in Khartoum during the year, and it would push it out of the river and really cleanse the river, and then there would be a big flood. And of course there were lots of frogs and So, I mean, when you talk about a plague of frogs and a plague of locusts and the river turning red, those things happened all the time, whether he's going to kill the firstborn, I don't know. That's, it was a difficult, let's face it, it was difficult to give life in that period of time. A lot of women died in childbirth, and a lot of their children died in childbirth.
Yeah, there was a lot of offering up of children. There was burning offerings and Moloch and Baal, and are they're to do with the Jewish religions, or did the Egypts have a view of that?
I don't know. That I do not know.
It's interesting, isn't it? Who do you think you would ask something like that? Who do you know? Anyone that comes to mind?
Who would know something like that?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, I would think you would need to talk to someone who's a much more studied biblical scholar.
Yeah, the problem is though, if you like Mike Heiser, I had him on the show. He's a biblical scholar, but then he doesn't have a view of the ancient Egyptians. He kind of,
right.
There's nobody that kind of crosses those two fields.
Right.
It's got
well, those are good questions.
Yeah, they're interesting. Oh, I find it interesting. I'm just wondering why now we aren't worshipping in the way of the ancient Egyptians and worshipping, like the sun god. It seems to me to be a natural thing to look up and give praise to the sun.
Well, I think that there are more people these days who are less, well, the word that is Catholicized or Anglicanized, but they're more Unitarian in their views than they have been in the past. Even, I have myself met a lot of people who happen to be Episcopalian priests or bishops, or and they will say, yeah, well, I see it a slightly different way, but this is the traditional way that we're taught to see it, but let's discuss that. More people these days I find are thinking about these things, especially when we have a group of people that, say, Reverend Sally Bingham has gotten together, who are environmentalists, and she has a group called Interfaith Power and Light, and they're all religious people of many disciplines who are environmentalists, and they are coming back to seeing that, the divine world and the planet on which we live are connected.
Yes, exactly. I mean, do you think there is a god like, Anubis waiting in the wings, or will he have morphed by now into something else?
Well, I wouldn't say that there is anyone that's one divine being that's waiting in the wings. I believe that where we focus our attention, what we resonate with is what will respond to our heart's call for spiritual development. And so I believe for myself that it would not necessarily be Anubis, though I have no problem with Anubis, but I'm very much connected to the divine feminine and to Isis. Oh. And so for me, I spend a lot of energy thinking about her and about the Divine Mother. That doesn't mean that I do that to any exclusion of anyone else, but that happens to be where my resonance is.
Oh, I see you. That's interesting. Yeah, I like that. I just write that down. That's interesting. So say me, for example, I feel a resonance with Ra, the sun god. So what would I do to get closer to that?
Well, for one thing, I think that, studies of just about anything, that the mysteries of the solar system, for example, yesterday we had one of the biggest solar flares that we have had in a very long time, and I looked at that. I sat on my computer and watched the video of the solar flare over and over and over again, trying to see if there was something that I could pick up in that. What is the message, for me at this time when I watched that?
Just for a minute. Whoops.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Who are you?
I am the architect. I created the Matrix. I've been waiting for you.
Why am I here?
You are the eventuality of an anomaly which, despite my sincerest efforts, I have been unable to eliminate from what is otherwise a harmony of mathematical precision, which has led you inexorably here.
You haven't answered my question.
The Matrix is older than you know, as you are undoubtedly gathering. The anomaly is systemic, creating fluctuations in even the most simplistic equation.
Choice. The problem is choice.
Right here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. Be here Wednesday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern Time for Private Eye Matrix Revealed with Monique Lasan.
Join Revolution Radio every Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Time on Studio B for Momentary Zen with host Zen Garcia at freedomslips.com, the People Station.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Hi, it's Christine Joanna Hart back, Christine Joanna Hart Show, broadcasting live from London. And my guest tonight is the author Normandi Ellis, and I hope you're enjoying the show so far. I certainly am. Normandi, are you still there?
Yes, I am. We just got into it and it just kept going.
I know. It's actually, I just had a break. I've been rushing around all day, actually. The schools have just gone back here, and oh God, it's been a weird day. So I didn't have much time to, do what I wanted really, and pick bits out of your books, and oh gosh, but I've read them fresh, so I know them, so I've got them beside me. So wait, I find my glasses. There was one beautiful poem, Remembering His Name, which really resonated with me because not having a name, and I'll just read it. Is it okay if I read it out?
Oh, I would love to hear you read it. Thank you.
Thank you. Remembering his name. At night in this house of fire, I recount the sadness of years. I tell the story of months. Give me my name. Say it over red jasper dipped in an unguent of flowers. When I had no visions, ravens came for my eyes. The breath of life escaped. When I had no words, worms crawled through my teeth. I am more than flesh and bone. I am more than the deeds I have done. I am more than all I remember. Give me my name. Say it over red jasper laid in the heart of sycamore. Give me my name, that gods may call me to soar like the hawk and crane. So that's really beautiful, isn't it?
Thank you.
Can you explain who wrote that and what? And I know you've got another book, haven't you, Invoking the Scribes? So
yes,
talk about that as well.
That particular piece, if you look inside Awakening Osiris, you'll see that every chapter has a concordance of chapters from the Egyptian Book of the Dead that I translated from. And this particular translation came from the hieroglyphs of the papyrus of Ani. Ani was a scribe who had a scribe school back in the New Kingdom era after Ramses. And he had many students that he was teaching how to write hieroglyphs, and he trained them to write the books of the dead, the various ones that people were going to ask for. Because it was kind of like, when you go to a funeral home and you say, I want this song sung at my funeral and I want this prayer read, and it was the same thing. The scribes were putting together your funerary service and your speeches to the divine being. And in a way, everybody had to buy a weighing of the heart, and everybody had to buy particular chapters of speaking to the gods, and different ones of them were additional. But remembering one's name was particularly important to me as I was thinking about when I was translating it, because of course, my personal take, I wrote that because it was like, if this is the last thing that I write and it's read at my funeral, what would I want it to say? And I was very much thinking about my grandfather, who passed into spirit, not being able to speak. He had Alzheimer's, and he had had a stroke, and he had lost his ability to speak, and he couldn't talk anymore. He couldn't call us by name. He couldn't call himself by name. And I thought to myself, that's a most powerful part of who we are, is our name. And it's our sacred name, in the name of this divine being. You're dedicated in the ancient Egyptian tradition, and even Jesus Christ talked about in the name of the Father, So it's a very powerful being able to give your lineage, your spiritual lineage, not only that, but your personal lineage. And so that it spoke to me about forgetfulness and the power of memory. And also the power of memory has to do with the myth of his body having been cut into pieces and thrown into the river, and Isis gathering them back up, because that's a part of our life. Our lives get, torn asunder, and we are scattered from our families, and scattered from the people we love, and scattered from even who we used to be. And her task, the task of Isis, was to remember, to pull the pieces of her husband back together and to remember him. And that piece spoke to the power of remembering one's life and remembering one's name. So this is, it's the power of knowing who one is that I wanted to express.
Yes, that really, me coming from an orphanage and not knowing where I came from and having that all mixed up by the Catholic Church.
Exactly.
Yeah, the creeds. It really resonates with me very, really strongly. Yeah, because my adoptive father said, I don't want you using my name, and yet I still use it. So I really, whenever I even use it, I feel like it's almost like people say about having a slave name. I feel like mine's even worse than a slave name. It's by someone who was sexually abusive to me, and he didn't want me to have it. He actually said, I don't want you to use it. So, and yeah, I use it every day. I mean, it's kind of horrible.
Right.
But I don't know. I don't really want to be one of these people that call myself, I don't know, like, Sleeping Moon or something like that. I don't,
Right.
I don't think
Right.
it would work. So, yeah. So can you sorry.
Oh, I was going to say having Hathor as your name would be perfect.
Isn't that a bit arrogant though? Oh, I'm the god Hathor.
Oh no! Every child was named after a divine being in ancient Egypt. And in fact, a lot of us are. Yeah. I mean, Sarah. If you look at it as an ancient Egyptian name, it would mean the spirit body of light, a Sarah. It's like, okay, I could see that as a name.
Oh, I see. But what would you use as your surname then, if you use that as a first name? What would you think?
Well, I think it would depend on what energies you wanted to combine into your name. And I know a lot of people, the name that we're given at birth, we have a certain power that's connected with that. I mean, if you studied numerology, you would look at the power of that name. When you change that name, it gives you a different vibration. So, yeah, you would want to look at what that would be for you. I agree with you. It's not to be considered lightly, but being named after a divine being is not a bad thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an idea. That's interesting. So you became a priestess of Isis. What did that entail, actually, Normandi?
Oh, translating the Book of the Dead and studying mythology and the goddess in as many cultures as I could find. The truth of the matter is that when I became ordained as a priestess of Isis, I had been doing this work for 25 years. Yeah. And I appeared before Lady Olivia Robertson, who was the archdruidess at Clonigal Castle of the Fellowship of Isis. And she said, I'm going to make you a priestess of Isis. And I said, well, I need to study under someone. And she said, oh, you've done all the study that you need. Oh. And she just made me a priestess. I was like, okay. But, I do, like last night, there was a beautiful full moon here. And I performed a full moon service in dedication to Isis and to Mother Earth Gaia. And it was really quite lovely to feel that energy. And so as long as I'm breathing, I'm going to be in the dedication of Isis. It simply is what I do. I can remember meeting her for the first time when I was 5 years old, and I told my mother that she had to make a cup of coffee because God's wife had come to the door, and we needed to bring her in because it was snowing outside. And my mother said, well, what is her name? And I said, well, it sounds like the Ice Queen. And later I realized it was Isis, but my mother made her a cup of coffee and brought her in, and we talked to God's wife for a very long time. My mother, this very Christian lady who was sort of open to, okay, if that's where you see the divine, then that's fine,
Hmm. Do you ever pray to God? Do you ask for things? And if you do, what God is that? Is that Atan? Do you sort of?
No, I can use, because I'm a spiritualist minister, and I have a congregation that happens to be not just people who are interested in ISIS, but are interested in, some of them are very Christian, some of them follow Native American traditions, some of them are pagan. And so what I do is I use the term Mother, Father, God, or Great Spirit, because that will cover just about everything, you know. But in my heart, I'm talking to ISIS, you know.
Oh, really? You wouldn't prefer a male God, a sort of creator? You prefer that? You prefer?
I prefer ISIS, you know, but I that's just the way I roll.
I'll allow you that.
But I realize it's not the way other people roll. So Mother, Father, God works, and so does Great Spirit, you know. So
Yeah.
it's not, yeah. So it's not sort of male or female.
Exactly. Well, I was talking to the sun. Well, you know, I was praying to the sun the other day. I was holding my hands out. A friend with me didn't really like it and said, "Oh, it's very pagan of you." But, you know, it does. I just really relate that to the sun. I mean, whenever it's there, it just lifts your spirit, makes you so
Yeah.
happy. I mean, why not talk to it while you're at it, you know?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So I just want to go on about, so that book is covered, the Union of Isis and Thoth, because I was reading through that about building your own temple inside you, the Aditum, am I saying that right?
Aditum, yeah. Yeah.
And building a temple without. So what can people do if they don't really have huge, big houses? What would you advise them?
Well, one thing that I have done, because I live on a little small little house, but I have my very own altar room where I go and I meditate and I pray, and I have 2 stones outside the doorway to that room that, you know, I have worked with, so that I put energy inside those 2 particular crystals, and when I pass the doorway into that room, I put my hands out so that I'm like almost brushing those particular crystals, and I recognize that I'm passing through a portal, which is another way of saying I'm entering another state of consciousness, and that I'm inside my temple. And I fixed it up whichever way, you know, has appealed to me. I have images of Isis and her sisters in there, and of course Osiris and Ptah and Thoth and Anubis, and a lot of my ancient Egyptian divine beings are inside my temple. But I also have Bridget. I have images of Bridget because I've become very fond of more Celtic spirituality since my trip to Scotland, and so I'm sort of growing that. And I have Lakshmi in there. I love my Indian goddesses as well. So, and I have some gods in there too.
Mm-hmm. So, what do you think about invocation? I mean, yes, hang on, you've written a book, Invocation of the Scribes. I haven't got to that book yet. I'm going to buy it. I'm going to actually go up to the British Museum tomorrow. So hopefully there's a bookshop near. Hopefully it will have that particular book. What is in that book?
Well, I teach a class which is the difference between praying and invoking. And praying is something that we were taught in the Christian tradition to do. And that's basically, you know, asking for things. The Native Americans are really good at gratitude, you know, as an attitude. And I think that that's something that most religious traditions need to add to their vocabulary, is the gratitude. But invoking is different than praying and asking for something. Invoking is an understanding that you are a co-creative power with the divine, and that there's a God spark within you, and that you align your will with divine will to create that which you are speaking forward, you know. And so you recognize that as you say it, it is so, you know. And it's already manifested.
Oh, I see. Whatever you want.
Yeah, yeah.
All right.
You know,
So,
and I think it's really important to think about what it is you really want, and to, because part of it has to do with if you invoke something and then you go around and you say, well, it hasn't happened yet, so I'm going to invoke it again. What you're doing is you're actually canceling out what you did previously and starting all over, and you're adding a doubt. You're adding a doubt to your prayer or to your invocation. And so I'll tell my students that worry is a prayer for something you don't want.
Oh, really? I worry nonstop, actually. So, how?
Don't do that. Don't do that, Chris.
I'm really bad at it. I'm really bad. For instance, I'm wondering how to earn money, and I constantly, how am I going to do it? How am I going to? And then I do a quick demand. God, show me a way. And then I sort of, oh God. Then I try and, imagine myself being successful. It's quite wearing. I don't know if I believe in any of it. I mean, I've been asking for a long time for God to show me a way to like earn money, and it's like been quite a few years now, and it's not really happening.
Okay, well, stop worrying and don't cancel the thought.
How long do we have to wait for things to happen?
Well, one thing is to accept, if you're asking for a way, then ask for a particular sign. And that is to say, when I see this, it will be connected to the way that you're trying to show me, rather than looking out going, is it that? Is it that? Is it that? Because that's a doubt. Is it? Is a doubt. Is it that? Is it that? And so I would say, divine being, I ask you to show me my path toward abundance, financial abundance. And when I see, and you can define whatever it is, a rainbow, whatever that rainbow leads to, whatever sign it points to, that's going to be the sign that I'll accept as the answer. And then you just follow it.
Really? So what can the sign be? Can the sign be, I'm trying to think of what sign you might have.
Well, yeah, it's up to you. It could be a yellow truck going by with your name on it, And I actually did that one time, and believe it or not, it happened. I was like, okay, there's the yellow truck. It's got my name on it, Normandi Trucking.
Wow, that's interesting. I always thought that invoking meant conjuring up an entity.
Well, it doesn't necessarily mean an entity, but it does mean conjuring up. It's invoking is creating within yourself through your vocalization the power and capacity to make things happen in your life. Now, if you want to invoke a being, I mean, that you can do that. I don't ever do that, but one could, I suppose.
Yeah. When you, like your book, Invoking the Scribes, if I assumed you were going to call them up, no?
Well, actually, I did. Because when I wrote that book, you want to hear how I wrote that book? I invoked the scribes. I was working on the manuscript. I had the book I was working with. It was a 3-ring binder. And I would, work on the computer and then print it out and type it up in the book. And I had a list of questions I would ask. I had 2 scribe statues that were sitting on my desk, and I gave them names. I gave them the names of ancient Egyptian scribes, Kanwast and Rahotep. Those were the 2 scribes that I decided those 2 statues were holding the energy for. And I gave them their very own pens and so on. And I would work all day, because part of invoking something means you have to do the work. You also have to do the work. It's like I'm asking for your energy, but I'm giving you my energy too. And so I'd work all day on the book, and I'd usually leave it at the end of the day with a question for what we were going to be studying the next day. And I would say to my scribes, I would invoke them, wake me up when we've got something. And then I'd go to sleep. And usually they would wake me up in the middle of the night when we had something, and I'd start writing again. So yeah, you can invoke, it's like some people want to invoke some sort of demon or something, but, why do that? What's the purpose of that? I called on Isis last night. I invoked her presence and her energy to come and surround us in this sacred circle as we were dedicating ourselves to supporting the divine feminine on planet Earth. And she was there for the entire hour. And then, it was like, okay. And then we let that energy sort of drift up and go around the globe, But in the process of doing that invocation, we were filling ourselves with her energy, her light, and sending it out from our heart space and through the palms of our hand to every place on planet Earth that needed it. And yeah, that was an invocation.
Oh, right. Great. So how did you start saying that? I mean, was there a preparation before you started?
Yeah, I spent about an hour in meditation, listening actually to what Spirit wanted me to do in that particular ceremony. I spent a fairly long time thinking about preparing my sacred space. For example, I chose a particular color of candles. I had gone and bought particular flowers that had certain energy by their color, by the mystical meanings of those particular flowers. I created holy water to have on the altar. I went and I got pink sea salt for the sacred element of earth that I was going to place on the altar. I had an owl feather. I had incense that I had made that I was going to use for this particular full moon ceremony. So yeah, and I had particular stones I was using. So there was a lot of preparation for the actual work. And that's not busy work. That's all done in meditation, where everything that you touch and choose, you are dedicating it in honor of what you're doing for that particular ceremony. And a lot of that, too, is inside that book with Union of Isis and Thoth. It talks about creating the ritual around doing a sacred ceremony. And I teach that here at Camp Chesterfield in the Metaphysical School, how to, the practical aspects of doing a sacred ceremony.
Oh, right. And are there special, I haven't come to that part in the book, actually. Is there special words you use, or do you speak from the heart when you're calling?
I think a lot of it is speaking from the heart. I think if you try to memorize a particular prayer, and you say it wrong, then you go, oh, wait, So, but there are certain prayers that I say over and over again, because I think they have a certain power and a certain cadence, and I don't mess with them. But much of what I say is composed. A lot of times it's written down, but it's composed during meditation with Isis or one of my guides to help me create the energy that I would like to put into that particular circle.
Yeah. So do you have a church out there or a ministry?
I do have a church out here. As I said, I'm a reverend for the Spiritualist Church. It's the Indiana Association of Spiritualists here at Camp Chesterfield. But I also have a group of women that I meet with who are from the Fellowship of Isis. So I do both.
Are they out? Because it's Lady Olivia, where is she?
She's passed. She has passed now. God bless her. She was lovely lady. And when she passed, she came to me in a dream. I didn't know she had passed. And I said, oh, Lady Olivia, what do you want? And she said, I want to know if you will do anything for the Fellowship of Isis. And I said, anything you ask me, lady, I'll do. And so then she said, done. And then she left. So it was very sweet. I was like, oh, and then I found out she had passed. But yeah.
So have you carried it on the fellowship for her?
Well, here in this community, I have a couple of women that I work with. And there are many other people who have studied with Lady Olivia over the years. There's a temple to Isis, a full-fledged temple to Isis in Geyserville, California. They are still carrying on the Temple of Isis at Clonigal Castle, where Lady Olivia was. And if you ever get a chance to go there, do. I believe it's in Ireland. And then there are people all around Europe who are practitioners. There are people in Chicago, I know. There are people in Las Vegas who have temples, and a lot of Sekhmet temples, too. Not all of them are to Isis, but some of them are temples to Sekhmet. Beautiful one out in Las Vegas, if you ever get a chance to go there.
Is there any temples to Ra?
I believe there are, but I don't know where. Right now, I had thought there was one. There are temples to Horus in Oregon, and there was one in Idaho, but that priest has just passed in the spirit, so I don't know where his temple has gone. I
noticed that in your book there was the ceremony of the Caddices. I can't say, is it Caddices? Caduceus. Probably.
Yes.
What does that mean?
The caduceus is the caduceus you probably recognize as the medical staff. So it's a staff around which two serpents are intertwined, and it usually has wings on it. You see it at like pharmacies. You still see it in Egypt outside pharmacies. Very interesting. What was the, I've just lost his name. The Greek physician, Hippocrates. Yes. And so that when people took the medical oath, the Hippocratic oath, that was Hippocrates' staff, and that came from Thoth as a healer, the god of healing.
Oh. And there's a really good invocation in that book, The Union of Isis and Thoth, isn't there, about, I was reading it last night. I actually read it twice because I read it before and kind of took it in, and then I read it again where I was more able to kind of do the exercise. It's like an exercise, isn't it?
Yeah, there are exercises for how to write an invocation. And in the very back of that book, there are a lot of invocations that are written to various divine beings, some of which, there's one to Ra, I'm pretty sure. And when Nikki Scully and I taught mystery school out in Oregon at her temple, we did this for like 20 years. And this is only the first year that we've not done it. She and I had our students create their own invocations to the divine beings that they felt very strongly identified with. They would write sacred hymns and invocations. Oh. And so the back of that book has a bunch of them in it.
Yeah, I can see them now. There is a hymn to Ra, you're right.
Yeah, why don't you read it? Since you like him so well and you have such a good voice, why don't you read that?
Such a good voice. I'll try. I'll put my glasses on, actually. Let me see. It's written. It's quite. Sorry, stuff them on. Let me see. Hymn to Ra. In the center of the sundial, in the center of the garden of the gods, live the brightest flowers. Hang on. Sorry. Live the brightest flowers, tall and graceful, yellow and red and orange, with touches of blue and lavender, all but a pale replication of the many shades of Ra. Your radiance extending through the temple, a constant reminder of the supremacy of the sun in all its glory. What fragrance lifts the heart to new heights, new delights, and reminds us of the source of might itself. Thank you for the warmth that nourishes the light that shows us our way, and the brilliance without which all life would cease. From dawn to dusk we revel in the beauty you expose, yet it is within the darkness as you travel through the body of Nut that the depth and breadth of the mysteries reveal themselves to those who would seek the true value of life and our service and our reason for being. All hail to Amun-Ra, the imperishable one. May our eternal dance as we tirelessly spin around you bring you joy and help to keep your fire burning brightly, lighting our way to our highest potential. Hail Ra, Lord of Life itself. Well, that was fun.
Oh, nice. Who wrote that one?
Nikki.
Nikki wrote that one. Okay, perfect. Because her description there is of the description of the place inside her own garden that is a hidden place that she has dedicated that to Ra.
All right.
And so her description of the flowers and the way that she's arranged the flowers and the colors that surround it, and how that particular part of her garden is a reflection of the entire temple. And it sits in the center of her garden. It's quite lovely. And so she uses in a poetic way to describe the physical structure of where that part of her temple is, but it's also symbolic of the energy that she uses for that.
Oh, brilliant. It's lovely. So the going back to the cadices, that was something that Thoth gave to somebody to help them?
Well, the caduceus is one of his sacred emblems, and I think that the staff of Ra is what was used in his creation myth to stir the cauldron of creation. So you can think of it as that which stirs the cosmic soup. You can think of that staff as being what kind of creates the spiral galaxies. You know, you can see that whole pot of soup and all of life as the stars moving round and round inside the galaxies in the Milky Way. And he has this beautiful creation myth that Thoth doesn't create like with, he doesn't create by speaking. He doesn't create by molding things out of clay. He creates scientifically and mathematically. And as he's stirring this cosmic cauldron, he recites the following chant. He says, first I was 1, then I was 2, then I was 4, then I was 8, and then I was 1 again. And he's talking about the 8 beings of creation that he puts together inside his cauldron. And I'll tell you what those 8 beings are in a minute, if I can remember. But what he's doing is he's creating mathematically by division. First I was 1, then I was 2, then I was 4, then I was 8, then I was 1 again. And when he does that, what he's really talking about are cells dividing. You know, or he's talking about, you can even think of the DNA spiral, you know, with its 8 prongs that match up. First there was 1, 2, 4, 8, then it was 1 again. You know, so you're thinking about how that dividing of the cell becomes one being. You know, it's really a wonderful way of explaining science, that the ancient Egyptians somehow already got this on a different level, and that those 8 beings, I'm sorry, were like paired male and female.
Oh, I really enjoyed and I don't know where you got it from or whether you invented it yourself, the exercise where you breathe the serpents up your center and they go past the trap.
Yeah, that's Nikki's. That's very much her contribution, because she works primarily with Thoth.
Oh, I see. And does he work with serpents? Is he the one god?
Yeah, yes, he has those serpents that move up the caduceus. And the beings inside the cauldron that we're speaking of are serpents and frogs.
All right. So why did I? Excuse my ignorance. I thought it was Aten that made the world into being, but now you're saying it's Thoth?
Well, it depends on where you come from, because the creation stories are particular to their region of the world. Khnum is way down in southern Egypt. So it's much more desert, and there's much more waters overflowing and leaving mud everywhere. And so you have a god who makes beings out of clay there. Whereas when you go to the delta, you have a lot more fecundity, because you're in the middle of this lush sort of delta land where everything's green and growing, and it's all reflective of the waters. And then you have a goddess who creates in that way out of her body. Her name is Neith, and so she reaches into the depths and pulls up the fish and pulls up all the flowers and all the beings of the world and the birds. And so that's a different way of creating. And then you have Thoth, who's got a spot in the middle kingdom of Egypt. And then you have Ptah, who has a spot where he creates with his language. And so each particular god or goddess has a different way of creating. And those are all ways of creating. Not one of them is wrong. They're each aspects of divine creation. And there are hieroglyphs that talk about the different ways of creation.
And what did Thoth look like?
Say that again?
What did Thoth look like? Excuse my ignorance.
What did Thoth look like? Well, he, in the imagery, he has an ibis head, and he has a human body. But Thoth, like any god or goddess, can look like anything you want him to look like. It's a divine being. It's the quality that we're talking about. So sometimes, Nikki likes to tell the story where she sees him, sitting with his feet on the desk, trimming his toenails with a cigar clipper. It's just because she thinks that he has more of a quality of tricksterness about him for her. For me, Thoth, when I think of him, I think about how an ibis hunts. When it goes fishing, it stands on one leg, it spreads its one wing out over the water and creates a shadow. And in that shadow, it can see into the depths. So it's through that kind of meditative looking into the depths of the river or the darkness of thought, or whichever way you would like to perceive that then he sees what it is he's looking for.
Why did he work with serpents then? Isn't it because they mentioned serpents in the Garden of Eden and the serpent having major knowledge? So what is it with the serpent? And I've noticed that the Egyptians, they have that golden bit on, certainly in films, they have a little thing coming over their third eye with a serpent coming out.
Well, serpents, if you live in the desert and in the bulrushes of ancient Egypt, you're going to have a lot of serpents. The goddess, one of the hieroglyphs for the goddess herself is as a serpent.
Oh, right.
And Set appears as a serpent, and every single goddess appears as a serpent. And the serpent is part of that Kundalini energy that, emerges from the third eye at the crown of the pharaoh. They call that the Wajet, but that's the serpent goddess who has a particular way of seeing that's different than human seeing.
How does she see?
Yeah.
Sorry, how does she see?
Well, she sees in a more visionary capacity, but serpents in general have thermal vision. So think about how, a serpent observes something. They can tell its liveliness by the heat in its body. you know. So that's a completely different way of seeing. We don't see in they see in what's the there's ultraviolet and what's the red vision.
I know what you mean, yeah, but I can't
Yeah.
think of it.
Yeah. Anyway, it's a thermal way of seeing things through the color red. And so that's how serpents see. They don't see in color.
Yes, yes. Have you got any books that you could recommend me to read? I'm going to get yours.
I tell you one that I think you will really like is by Jeremy Nadler. It should be very easy to get over in England because he's English. And he's written a book called The Temple in the Cosmos. And I think you'll like it very much.
Oh, thank you. Any others that you could think of?
Oh, gosh. Let me think. Graham Hancock's. Some of Graham Hancock's books are quite lovely. And, of course, my favorite is John Anthony West, Serpent in the Sky.
Is that very good?
Very good. Very good. It's one of my all-time favorites. He has a very symbolist view of ancient Egypt, like Schwaller de Lubec's. He's sort of like the inheritor of Schwaller de Lubec's work.
Who is that person?
He was R.A. Schwaller de Lubec's was an Egyptologist who looked at all Egyptian temples as symbols. Sometimes he's very difficult to read, but I would say Jeremy Nadler and John West are really good interpreters of his work.
Sorry, how do you spell his name? De Lubic?
D-I
Yeah.
Lubicz.
Oh, right. And his first name is Swaller?
It's R.A. and then Schwaller de Lubec's, and it's Schwaller.
Is he Jewish?
Yes.
Oh, interesting. What is a hieroglyph, actually? Is that like... They don't use letters, do they? They use, like, symbols that say a lot of things?
Well, they have 640-something different hieroglyphs that you would need to learn. Some of them are phonetic. Some of them are like two phonics together. Some of them are three phonics together. And some of them are only determinatives that tell you what the flavor of something is.
It's a shame that all that has been, well, I guess it hasn't been lost. There's people like you bringing it out, but it's not really like taught in schools or something like that, which it probably should be.
Well, it is taught in schools. If you want to go and get a doctorate in Egyptology, you'd learn hieroglyphs. Yeah.
But not at a young age, you know, you have to go and seek it out, don't you? It's not really dished out to you.
Right. Well, yeah. Unless you get somebody like me coming into your school, which I used to do.
Oh, did you?
I did. Because I was trained as a creative writer. To start, I would go into the schools and I would tell them stories from ancient Egypt, and then we would make pop-up books of ancient Egypt, you know, where pharaohs' faces would pop up, and you'd turn the page and a pyramid would appear, and we had decoder rings so that they would learn some of their hieroglyphs. And it was a lot of fun. And they would learn to tell their own stories. They would enter into the myth and become, you know, a version of Thutmose IV out in the sand, you know, listening in a dream to the Sphinx talking to him and telling him his future if he does blah, 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 you know. So, and what did they tell to you? So we used to do that a lot. It was a lot of fun. I had a great time. Great way to learn history and math and science, and it was quite interesting.
Yeah. Did you stop doing that?
I did. I stopped doing that.
Oh.
I loved doing it for a while, but I was doing it through grants that I got in the state of Kentucky and the Kentucky Arts Council. And unfortunately, our culture here in the United States is not supportive of the arts so much anymore. So.
Oh, it's a shame, isn't it?
It is.
Jennifer, we're coming to the end of the show, and I've really enjoyed having you. It's been really, entertaining and stimulating for me. Fantastic.
Thanks, Chris.
Oh, yes, it's been amazing. Yeah, thank you very much for coming on. Indeed. I want to tell people how to get hold of you.
Oh, yes. They can check out my website, which is normandyellis.com, or they can look at campchesterfield.net. And if they look under the, available mediums on the grounds, they can find me there.
Excellent. And are you on Facebook, but you're not on there very much?
I'm on Facebook every now and then. So yeah, go ahead and friend me on Facebook and say you heard me on Christine Joanna Hart's show, and I'll be happy to friend you.
Excellent. And also, so what about these trips out to Egypt? So do you still take people?
I do. We have a trip coming up in February, end of February, beginning of March. And there's still room on that particular trip. They could find me at shamanicjourneys.com, or they can go to the normandyellis.com website. And we may have a second trip. I've got one that's full in November and December, but I may have a third one coming up. So go ahead and send me some requests for information, and we'll see what comes up.
So... And that one, what would happen? So say I was going on that, I would meet you out in Egypt, because I think in England I'm a lot nearer, aren't I?
Yes, you are. You're a lot nearer. What we usually do is we start in Cairo. With a day or two, we'll begin at the Paws of the Sphinx. We'll have sunrise there, our own private ceremony. We'll go to one of the older cemeteries where the very first pyramid was at Saqqara, and we'll look through some of the early pyramids, like the Pyramid of Unas, which is the first appearance of the hieroglyphs at all during the Third Dynasty, 24,600 BC. Then we fly to Aswan. From there, we go to the Temple of Isis. And then we get on a boat and sail down the Nile, visiting several other temples along the way. We'll eventually stop in Luxor, visit the vicinity there, Valley of the Kings and Queens, Hatshepsut's temple. And then we'll go to the Temple of Osiris in Abydos, the Temple of Hathor in Dendera, and surrounding communities. And then we'll go back to Cairo at the end of the tour and go inside the Great Pyramid.
Oh, excellent. How many days is that?
It's 10 days.
And can you say how much it is on air? Or
Well, it's hard to tell because the price is varying, and I'm not being trying to be deceptive, but the economy is changing such in Egypt right now that we have not got the price for the December trip exactly down. So I can't tell you. But I will say that the trip that we're doing in February and March is at $5,678.
That's dollars. I'm wondering what the dollar is in the pound at the moment.
I'm not really sure. So you would have to put that in your converter on yeah.
How many days is it? Sorry, how many days?
It's 10.
10 days. Oh, well, that sounds... really interesting. It's better than, going off there yourself and trying to find your way around. I mean, it'd be awesome to go with someone like you. Is that with Nikki as well? Or?
No, Nikki won't be going, but I'll be going with another of her proteges, Indigo Run Love, or I'll be going with Deborah Jones in December. And one of the things I will say is that most of those 10 days are spent on a private dahabeya. We only take 16 people at a time so that our trips are pretty exclusive. We have a private chef, so anybody who has some type of food allergies can pretty much guarantee themselves something good to eat. It's great. And we have private visits at sunrise, like at the Temple of Isis, and private visit inside the Great Pyramid, and other places as well. We'll go and visit Sekhmet in a private visit. So we do a lot of things that other groups don't get to do.
Oh, excellent. Is there a Temple of Ra for me if I go?
Well, actually, they're all temples to Ra, but I would say Karnak would be your place, because that's the temple to Amun-Ra.
Oh, right. Yeah, and you go to that, do you?
Oh, yes, we do. And temple to Luxor as well, so yeah.
Oh, it sounds really... Is it dangerous out there? Because I went in a travel agent recently in London, and I just was inquiring about Egypt, and he said to me, we're not going there, it's dangerous right now. I mean, is it because of, ISIS, the terrorist group ISIS? Is it dangerous right now, or?
Well, we have not found it to be dangerous. I will say that we travel usually with a guard, an armed guard. So, should anything happen, but we stay pretty close to the beaten path. We register with the government so everybody knows where we're going. One of the reasons that the trip costs what it does is that we hire private guards all the way through. So when you're on a bus and it's traveling from this city to that city, you have an escort all the way through, a private guard escort. We've not had any problems at any of the hotels where we stayed. I would say, or any of the churches that we've gone to. If there's a hint of something, we usually detour and go somewhere else, and it's usually, you wouldn't even notice it. The itinerary can change, but we're always taking your safety as the first step.
So you go back and fro quite a lot then, do you, Normandi?
Yes, I do. I've been, I went 3 times last year, just once this year, but I'll go 3 to 4 times next year. Wow, because it's quite a way for you. I mean, it's not super far for us from London. But... No, it's about 13 hours. So, yeah. I usually go a little early to get myself adjusted and then come home and sleep for about 4 days. Yes. Oh, interesting. Well, we're coming right to the end of the show, and it's just been really awesome to have you. My name's Chris Jo Hart. You can find me on Facebook and my website, Chris Jo Hart Media. Check it out and subscribe below to my YouTube. Thank you to Mike Ringley for Revolution Radio. They are self-promoting, self-running radio station. It goes out across America. So if you enjoyed the show, please do donate to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. You can find the website for that. And of course, if you want to get access to it each month, you can also do that from the Revolution Radio website. Excellent. Shall I read something? Normandi, from your book. Do you have Awakening Osiris? Would you read the last piece, Hymn to Hathor? For that's one of the pieces I read last night at our full moon service, and we're still under the full moon. So if you would read that one, I would really love it. Lovely. What page is it on? It's the very last page of that book. Okay. Oh yeah, here we are. This is short. I might be able to squeeze another one in. Hymn to Hathor, blue-lidded daughter of dawn, golden lady of the mountains, carrier of her father's wisdom. Let an old man rest in your arms. Let him look last on love's face, breathing love's breath. I live in light 1,000,000 years. The sun rises or sets now, it matters not. Here is ecstasy in death and certainty in life. We are gods in the body of God. Truth and love are destinies. Go then and make of the world something beautiful. Set up a light in the darkness. And we've just come to the end. Thanks ever so much, Normandi. God bless. Thank you. Thank you. God is blessed. Bye. Bye-bye.
listening to Revolution Radio.
Most guys freeze. That's your cerebral cortex looking for an answer it doesn't have.
See? Even your brain knows you're screwed.
The body's filling with adrenaline right now, whether you know it or not. Your heart's beating fast. It's getting a little harder to breathe. The neurobiological system is telling it to run, but your knees are too weak to move.
Fear is not real. The only place that fear can exist is in our thoughts of the future. It is a product of our imagination, causing us to fear things that do not at present and may not ever exist. That is near insanity. Do not misunderstand me. Danger is very real, but fear is a choice. We are all telling ourselves a story.
You're listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. 100% listener-supported radio. Reporting to danger. Unafraid. Right here, where information never sleeps. Revolution Radio.
Don't make me angry. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry. See how the trouble you've started?
Join us here on Revolution Radio, Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Eastern on Studio B, for a politician, patriot, social savant, businessman, former investment banker, and Veterans Today columnist, Mike Harris. Listen to Mike as he exposes the corruption, sedition, and terrorism within our own government. He knows our system is flawed and that obstruction of justice is all too commonplace. His show, Short End of the Stick, pokes at this corruption with eloquent style. That's Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Studio B for the Short End of the Stick with the man who should have been elected governor of Arizona, Mike Harris.
That's right here on Revolution Radio.
Enjoy your
Extra big-ass fries.
You didn't give me no fries. I got an empty box.
Would you like another?
Extra big-ass fries.
I said I didn't get any.
Thank you. Your account has been charged. Your balance is 0. Please come back when you can afford to make a purchase.
No.
I'm sorry you're having
Come
trouble.
on. My kids are starving.
Thank you for tuning in to Revolution Radio. Here at Revolution Radio, we believe in freedom of ideas, freedom of speech, but above all, we believe in freedom of existence through self-reliance. This station is 100% listener-supported, and as a fundraising promotion, I have a kick-ass free gift for a $100 donation. 35,000 seeds. 25 years in the freezer. Long-term storable, 54 different varieties. So if food prices go crazy, the shit hits the fan, or if you just want to say...